All right, this is the third installment and hopefully the last of Agenda 2030. Now, just to, there was, last time I tried to make one of these videos, I didn't hit the record button, so there is some stuff that I missed, but it's so long that basically, you'll get the gist if you've watched all three parts anyway. But anyway, here we go. This one is it's pretty dry material, but I'm, pretty much getting through it. Just so when you see these policies and stuff coming up in your uh, towns and cities and whatever, and particularly like here in Canada, almost every law coming in now is coming in from backdoor from the United Nations. You'll hear things like sustainable development and stuff like that, and these buzzwords and stuff like that, and you'll always have a reference to the United Nations at some point. Anyway, just jumping in, this is kind of just randomly where I left off at the last one. Although I did meet, I did miss a little bit, but anyway, there's a lot of repetitive stuff in here. Anyway, sorry. 40. The means of implementing targets of under Goal 17 and under the SDG are key to realizing our agenda and equal importance of our goals and targets. The agenda includes SDGs can be met with a framework and relevant to global partnership for sustainable development and supported by the concrete policies and endorsements by the General Assembly and the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, which is the integral part of Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development. We recognize that the full implement of we recognize that the full implement of the Addis Ababa ABA action agenda is critical to the realization of the Sustainable Development Goals and targets. Okay, now keep going. 41. We recognize each country has a primary responsibility for its own economical and social development, and the new agenda deals with the means of requiring implemented goals and targets. We recognize these will include the mobilization of financial resources as well as capacity building for the transfer of environmentally sound technologies for the developing countries on favorable terms, including the conclusion of preferential terms as mutually agreed, public financing, both domestic and internationally, so meaning global taxes. That's what the global carbon tax is about, is to fund stuff like this. We will pay for vital role in providing essential services and publics and goods to the catalyzing other sources of financing. We acknowledge the role of diverse private sector, ranging from micro enterprises to cooperative multinationals and civil society organizations and philanthropic organizers, i.e. guys like George Soros, and implements of the new agenda. So in other words, they get to decide where everybody's money is going to go. So 42. We support the implementation of relevant strategies and programs of action, including the Istanbul Declaration of Program of Action, the SIDS Accelerated Modalities of Action, the SAMOA Pathway, the Vienna Program of Action, the landlocked development countries for the decade 2014 to 2024, and the reaffirm of the importance of the support of African Union Agenda 2063 and the program of the Partnership for Africa and develop the NEPAD, all of which are integral to the new agenda. We recognize the major challenges and achievements of durable peace and sustainable development in countries in conflict and post-conflict situations. So, in other words, these are really long-term, so the plan is always going to be molding to something new. But the agenda really is the same. It is basically one world government, one world everything, military, police, schooling, financial system, you get it. The problem is that not everybody around the world is on board with this. This is why, the Anglo-American Empire fights with the Eurasian Pacific Empire, which is Russia, China, and Iran, India, the BRICS nations, etc., etc. And of course, the Anglo-American empires, Canada, the United States, Europe, the Anglo-American petrodollar, so to speak. That's what a lot of the wars are about now. So by 2063, when they'll probably have a few new agendas in between that. Agenda 21 was supposed to be the be-all, end-all, but it doesn't really work. And the bigger these agendas get, the more impossible they become. However, the more impossible they become, the more destabilizing they seem to be around the world. So wrapped in a utopian blanket, it really, really doesn't do what it sets out to do. They say eradicate poverty and create this massive equality, but the idea that everybody's going to have the same, earn the same, it's very communistic when you think about it. They expect everybody's interchangeable, and basically not only interchangeable, but that everybody's some sort of a like a robot, that they're going to be able to follow this agenda with whatever, right? But anyway, 43. We emphasize that the international public finance plays an important role of complementing the efforts of the countries to mobilize the public resources domestically, especially in the poorest and the most vulnerable countries in the limited domestic resources, with limited domestic resources. An important of use of international public finance includes ODA is to catalyze additional resources and mobilization from other sources, public and private. The ODA provides reaffirm the respective commitments, including the commitment by the developed countries to achieve the target of 0.7% of ODA and GNI to developing countries, and 0.15% to 0.2% ODA and GNI to the least developed countries. So in other words, they want to build manufacturing and stuff in third world countries to give jobs there, but they will take it from us to give it to them. Communism has always been the same. Everybody's equal as long as I can have more. So this is for the little people. It's not for the big people up at the top, right? So 44. We acknowledge the importance of the international financial institutions, basically Rothschild banking, in line with their mandates. The policies and space of each country, in particularly developed countries. We recommend it to broadening the strength and voicing of participants in developed countries, including African countries, least developed countries, landlocked developed countries, small island developed states, and middle-income countries. The international economic decision made norm setting and global economic governance. So global governance tells you one world government, right? So 45. We acknowledge that the essential role of national parliaments through their achieved legislation and adopted budgets and the role and ensuing accountability for their effective implementation of our commitments. Governments and public institutions will also work closely and implementation regionally, locally, authorities and sub-regional institutions, international institutions, academia, philanthropic organizations, volunteer groups, and others. So keep going here. Because there's so much to read here, what I do is I delete the the chapters as I go, because if not, I'll get lost where I am. 46. We underline the importance of role of cooperative advantage of adequate resource relevance, coherent, efficient, and effective UN system in supporting achievements of the SDGs and sustainable development, while stressing the importance of strengthened national ownership and leaders of a country's level. We express our support for the ongoing ECOSOC dialogue on the long-range term positioning of the United Nations Development System in context with this agenda, follow up and review. Okay. 47. Our government have primary responsibility for follow-up and review and national, regional, and global levels in relevant to the progress made in implementing the goals and targets over the coming 15 years. To support accountability to our citizens, we will provide a systematic follow-up and review at the various levels as we set out our agenda and the Addis and Ababa actions agenda. The high-level policies formed under the Auspicious and General Assembly and the Economic and Social Council will have the central role in overseeing the follow-up and the reviews of the global at the global level. Okay, sounds marvelous, doesn't it? 48. Indicators are being developed to assist this work. Quality, accessibility, timely, and reliable Degenerated data will, desegregated data will need to help the measurements of progress and to ensure that no one is left behind. Such data is key to decision making. Data is information from existing reporting mechanisms should be used where possible. We agree to intensify our efforts to strengthen strategically or statistically capacities in developing countries, particularly African countries and developed countries, landlocked, developed countries, small developed states, and middle-income countries. We are committed to the development border measures of progress and complement gross domestic product. A call for action to change our world. Yeah, in their image, so to speak. So basically, the point is that this is centralized power that you don't get a say. So they decide that you're too rich in your country, therefore we're going to take down your standard of living to give it to somebody else over here, which doesn't really work either, because the reason why a lot of third world countries are third world is because the people, they don't have the how's the best way to say it? Like they're just not striving for that. They're not. They have no inclination to chase after what we want, right? They're doing their own thing, and fine. That's fine. That said, where the problems lie is where you artificially, like for example, Africa, the populations, the average childbearing or birth rate in some African countries are like 7 children, and the only reason why it's so inflated is because of world food programs and stuff like that, which always goes break or bust. So these people have all these kids, and then all of a sudden their kids have more kids, their kids have more kids, and then all of a sudden there's a big starvation. This happens every couple of years because there's never enough money to go around. And then of course, once these populations start booming, well, then they start taking more taxes, like from into foreign aid programs, which tax other countries and make them poorer. That's what I mean. Whereas if they were to allow local markets to develop in these small countries, number one, the inflation of people would go down, so it'd be more manageable. Number two, they would actually start their own, they would be sustainable that way. But these people, again, populists are very strange. They either want to inflate the population or kill off everybody. And it seems like the United Nations is kind of a bit bipolar on that, where on one part of it, they can't wait to sterilize everybody and kill off everybody, and on the other part, they want to flood mass immigration to every other country because they think it's going to, they have this idea that the more people you have, and yes, the statistic is correct, the more people you have in a nation can contribute on the world stage more, because you have more people, you can have more prosperity, etc., etc. But there's a catch. Everybody has to be kind of like-minded. So you can't just take third world people, flood them in, which replenishes at a rate of at least 80 million a year, and flood them into all the other countries and then expect them to just pick up where everybody else is. They're not there yet in their own countries, so they're definitely not going to be there when they arrive in your country. You might have exceptions to the rule, but in the masses, no. So, just something to consider. 49. 70 years ago or earlier, a generation of world leaders came together to create the United Nations from the ashes of war and devised and divisions. They fashioned this organization and the values of peace, dialogues, and international cooperation with the underpin it. Supreme element of those values is the Charter of the United Nations. Again, centralized power to the United Nations with unaccountable bureaucrats is a recipe for disaster. Again, almost every policy coming out here in Canada, and of course everything they're pushing in the States, comes from the United Nations in the back channels. Like, you don't see it direct, you see it in the back channels. 50. Today we are also taking decisions of great historic significance. We resolve to build a better future for all people, including millions who have denied such chance led to dissent in defining the rewarding lives of the achievement their full human potential. We can there first generate to successful in ending poverty, just as we may be the last to have a chance to save the planet. A little bit utopian here for sure. The world will be better place in 2030 if we succeed in our objectives. Well, the problem is again, it's the same thing you have in even the socialized countries like Canada, the United States, Sweden, whatever, all these places like that, where all this kind of equality, where everybody is just basically going to get some sort of a handout. Well, it only lasts for so long, and then you can't afford it anymore. Um, that's not sustainability. And again, just handing stuff out and calling it opportunity doesn't really create opportunity. The idea of these third world countries being brought into the future type of thing and more modernized and stuff like that, I have no problem with that. The problem is when you have to destroy everybody else's nation in order to accomplish that, because it is not a goal that can be accomplished, and it's just not realistic. I'm not saying they shouldn't try, but if the nation itself isn't taking the necessary steps to try on its own, the plan will fail. The reason why we have TVs and airplanes and Pokemon and deep sea drillers and submarines and spacecraft and stuff like that in the first world countries is because people were naturally moving towards that stuff anyway. They were going to do it anyway. They were going to build it anyway. If you look at the humble beginnings of flight, I mean, it started out with two guys in a backyard somewhere with a hill. You know what I mean? So like that was the aspiration. It didn't go to these other countries because these third world countries, they don't aspire after that. They're not into that. They don't care about that. Therefore, you can give them, and this is something that they're noticing in Africa, where they do build like water treatment plants and all that stuff. They have to have foreigners come in and run them because the Africans simply don't want to run it, or they just let it degrade to a point where like the people they just don't maintain it. They're not interested in it. If it's there, great, they'll use it, but if not, they'll just regress back to what they were doing. So where in nations where you have forward-thinking people, there are some nations that are trying to use nuclear power or whatever and stuff like that. All that stuff is fine and dandy, but again, it's kind of one of those things. If you set these things up for people and they don't know how to maintain it, it could actually create more disaster in the long run. And again, with Utopianites of the United Nations, which was brought in with the Rockefellers and Rothschilds or whatever right after World War II, it was first known as the League of Nations. Now it's known as the United Nations. And the bad thing from that is, again, these people, when you understand that their idea of world government is not really for the best in humanity, it's to control humanity, to control the resources. The idea of global warming and stuff like that, again, the whole carbon tax is their solution to basically fixing global warming, which there has been no significant warming. Even the guy who came up with the global warming hockey stick with Al Gore, who's a United Nations guy, just this year said there's been no significant warming. Our model was wrong. The other thing is they never talk about right now. They're saying every year you hear it on the mainstream media, it's the hottest year on record, but they omit a lot of things to make it the hottest year on record. Once you start looking into it, you realize yes, they're lying. There is no when they talk about tidal heights, sea level rising. There's been no significant sea level rise in the past 600 years. So in other words, is the sea levels higher than what they were 600 years ago? Yes, they are. Are they higher than they were 6,000 years ago? Yes, they are. But the thing is it seems to be a steady normal progression, stuff like that. So it doesn't mean there isn't pollution and stuff like that. I don't put global warming in with pollution. Man-made pollution, I consider something different. The CO2 things that they keep trying to pass off, again, we're not even at 1/10,000th or 1,000th of a lethal dose, and we create so little CO2 in comparison to Mother Nature, forest fires and stuff like that. There is a lot of conflicting evidence and facts out there, whatever, that, so you got to watch where the facts come from. But a lot of the time, for example, the feedback loop, if we were going with the feedback loop that they're using, we should be standing on the surface of Mars right now. So, and we're not. If we were to listen to, again, the models were wrong. And think about it this way. They're telling you that they know what's going on with the planet exactly, and that it's man-made, but yet your weatherman, how many times does your weatherman get the weather wrong? This is very important, because if they can't even get that right, they want to predict the weather for one area, your city, your town, or whatever, or your country, and it's wrong in areas, and it's wrong. Sometimes they get it pretty good when it's really obvious, but sometimes they're completely wrong in the long-range forecast. They just cannot forecast usually more than a couple of days ahead. The 2-week forecast always changes, right? So if they can't predict that accurately, you mean to tell me they're going to predict the next 10 years, 20 years, 100 years? You know what I mean? Like it's just, yeah, it's a scam. It's a scam to tax people out of their wealth. Anyway, 51. We are announcing today that agenda for the global action for the next 15 years is a charter for the people and the planet of the 21st century and children and young women and men to critical agents change and will find in the new goals and platforms to the channel their infant capacities for activism into the creation of a better world. Again, always sounds really utopianistic, but when you look at the policies that they bring in to make this stuff happen, again, they remove your choice for you, and that the fact that they say that they know how to run the world better than people in their own countries and stuff like that, that they're the ones that are going to save the planet. Remember, they're going to do this by restricting a lot of your freedoms. That's the only thing they can do to have this much control. I don't think it's going to work. Well, it isn't working, let alone going to work. 52. We the people are the celebrated open words of the United Nations Charter. It is we the people who embark on the road to 2030. Our journey will involve governments as well as parliaments and UN systems, international institutions, local authorities, indigenous peoples, civil societies, business and private sector, and scientific and academic community. All the people, millions of, have already engaged with and will owe this agenda to its agenda to the people, by the people, and the people, and for the people. And this, we believe, will ensure its success. Well, again, if not everybody's like-minded, you're never going to get this utopianistic thing happening. 53. The future of humanity, of our planet, lies in our hands. It lies also in the hands of today's younger generations, who will pass the torch to the future generations. We have mapped out a road to sustainable development. It will be for all of us to ensure the journey is a success and its gains irreversible. Sustainable development goals and targets. Okay. Let's see. It is pretty long. I think there might be even a fourth part to this because, yeah, there's just so much to it. I've already done the first three parts. I'm going to have to figure out what they were called so I can make sure that you guys can follow the sequence or whatever. 54. Following the inclusive process of international negotiations and based upon the proposals of Open Work Group and Sustainable Development, which includes Chapeau contextualizing the latter and following the goals and targets which we have agreed. Okay. But again, how are they going to enforce all this stuff? You know what I mean? You have people deciding where a meeting for the next meeting, and those people somehow are supposed to get all this stuff done. Impossible. 55. The SDGs and targets and international integrated and indivisible goal in nature and universally applicable, taking into account different national realities, capacities, and levels of development, and respecting national policies and priorities. Targets are defined as aspirational and goals on which the government is sitting on its own national targets, guided by the global level and ambition to take into account national circumstances. Each government will also decide how these aspirational goals and targets should be incorporated into the nation planning and processes and policies and strategies. It is also important to recognize that the link between sustainable development and other relatives ongoing processes and economic, social, and environmental fields. Okay. Again, you don't need the United Nations to be able to do this stuff in your country, but you just need citizenry. The idea that you have to have a global control system is just ridiculous. You can see right now in the EU where it's pulling itself apart, because the EU basically is a kind of what you would call a blueprint for a one world government. It kind of already did that with the euro and stuff like that. That might be why they're trying to destroy it now, so that in 2018 the Rothschild IMF bank can issue a one world currency, and that one world currency puts us again in the what's called globalized, basically giving all your power to the United Nations, because nations can't run themselves independently. Well, That's not true, because you have to understand there's a lot of things that hold a lot of nations back by foreign policies, etc., etc. Uh, Sanctions, trade, bad trade deals like NAFTA, the Trans-Pacific Trade Partnership, trust me, is a part of the United Nations. NATO is a part of the United Nations. This is all one system. Again, one more governance, right? So it's already kind of upon us, but it's not manageable. Too big to fail, I say too complicated to work. 56. The deciding upon these goals and targets, we recognize that each country faces specific challenges to achieve sustainable development. And we underscore that the special challenges facing the most vulnerable countries, in particular the African countries, least developed countries and landlocked developed countries, and small island developing states, as well as the specific challenges facing the middle income countries and the institutional conflict needed in social attention. Here's one thing too for sustainable development. I keep saying this buzzword, sustain. Okay, African countries, okay, are sustainably developed. Why? Because they're underdeveloped. They're not ripping up their resources. They're not over polluting their lands. They're if anything, you would just leave them the way they were, and you'd have a green planet. You have a very green Africa. Yes, there is some pollution there. There is some countries that do really have poor regulations and stuff like that. But for the most part, I mean, these people underdeveloped countries is about as sustainable as you can get. So I know it sounds a little bit strange, but it's true. These people could still have high education and stuff like that and live in a clean environment. There's no, if they don't need big infrastructure, it's once you start building mega cities, that's when you have to have all this infrastructure, right, to sustain it. Small towns and little shanty shacks and stuff like that, there's nothing to sustain those things. They only need a water system and plumbing enough to keep the area clean. That's it. Everything else is organic. You know what I mean? The farming, everything like that. They don't need big irrigation systems. They could do it all small. So it's almost better to leave them undeveloped if you're so concerned about having a green planet. You know what I mean? It's just, with the innovations we have now, smaller and more clever would work out much better than these big mega cities and stuff like that. Mega cities are not sustainable. They require too much resources. Small towns are sustainable. Why? Because they don't require as much. They don't require the infrastructure. They don't require subways. They don't require all this stuff. And you really need that. You know what I mean? Like that type of thing. As long as you can grow food, have a little bit of development, a little bit of manufacturing, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, your country will be good. You don't need massive piling people on top of each other type of thing, and then congesting the routes or whatever. Okay, 57. We recognize that the baseline data for several of the targets remain unavailable, and we call for the increased support of strength, data collection, and capacity building in member states and develop national and goal baselines, and we do not yet exist. We commit to addressing the gap in the collection, as well as the better informed measurements of progress, and particularly for those below which we do not have clear numerical targets. 58. We encourage the ongoing efforts of the states and other fora to address the key issues which potentially challenges the implementation of the agenda, and we respect the independent mandates of those processes. We intend for the agenda and its we would support and be without prejudice to those other processes and decisions taken therein. Okay, see how I'm doing for time. This is right off the United Nations page if you want to go read the whole thing for yourself too. I just figured somebody narrated it for you. It might be, I don't know, even if I'm not the best narrator on the planet, whatever, 59. We recognize that the different approaches of various models and tools and available to each country in accordance with the national circumstances and priorities to achieve sustainable development, and we reaffirm that planet Earth, its ecosystems, and our common home, that Mother Earth is the common expression in number one in countries and regions. Sustainable development goals. Number one, end poverty in all its forms everywhere. Number two, end hunger and achieve food security and improve nutrition and promote sustainable agriculture. Number three, ensure healthy lives and promoting well-being for all ages. Now, that sounds good and dandy now, but again, when you look at how they actually implement this stuff, they just drop off United Nations food bags everywhere, that type of thing, and the food rarely goes to the people it's intended to. It's just really a mess the way this organization works. So what they say and what they do is two different things. ensuring inclusive and equitable quality education and promoting lifelong learning opportunities for all. Again, that I think is up to the nation itself to decide for if it wants to be educated or not. I really don't see how you can force that on people. It just, yes, great, but again, we can't even, take care of the people we have in our own first world countries a lot of the time. We don't have the best education system in the world here in Canada. We have a good education system, but it's not the best. And of course, they're digressing it so that people that can't achieve can, like the what they call the Common Core in the States. I forget what they're calling it up here in Canada, but it's the same idea. They're implementing it in all the countries. Many teachers here in Canada are actually resorting to older textbooks because they said the kids are actually being dumbed down by the new textbooks. And of course, these teachers usually end up getting fired. Why? Because they're supposed to follow the United Nations. But then again, why is the United Nations deciding what we should be teaching our kids? You know what I mean? That type of thing. 5. Achieve gender equality and empower for all women and girls. This is a big section that I kind of missed on the last one. And all this PC stuff, like the gender equality, the representation of women in Parliament and everything like you see in Canada is going on, all this gender diversification and stuff like that, transgendered bathrooms, all that stuff, if you've not noticed, is coming in all in one time. It's all coming in now because of this. This is something they were talking about. So again, all these transgendered bathrooms and the LGBTQ stuff is coming in from the United Nations. It's a part of it's right in here. Although I missed a whole part of it because I forgot to hit the record button when I did the last, so I missed probably, I don't know, 30 minutes of stuff that I read. Basically everything you're seeing on the TV now about gender equality and representation of women in high positions of power and stuff like that, this is all coming in from the United Nations. This is what Justin Trudeau is following. Everything like that. This is what Obama follows. This is what Hillary Clinton wants to follow. It sounds great and everything, and that what it's saying is it doesn't matter if the person is qualified. It matters what gender they are. So it only matters if a woman gets a position or a minority gets a position, that type of thing. So you're lowering the standard once again. So for diversification and stuff like that, which actually makes things even more incompetent in the long run when you get people outside their element that really shouldn't be there. I mean, I don't care if they're male, female, whatever. If they get a job, as long as they're qualified for the job, because if they're not qualified, you're going to put them in over their head, and everything's going to get screwed up. And get enough people to do that, you're going to screw up your nation. Number 6, ensure availability and sustainable management of water and sanitation for all. 7, ensure access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy for all. Number 8, promote sustainable, inclusive, and sustainable economic growth and full productivity and employment and decent work for all. Okay, these things, again, sound really, really good, but again, how do you guarantee good wages for somebody? You can't. The natural market will. The problem with minimum wages and stuff like that, particularly in poorer countries, if it's already a problem, I'm going to use Canada. Canada is one of the highest standard of living countries you can live in. And I'm not just saying that because I'm Canadian. I'm saying that because it shows time and time again, we're always in the top 5 for quality of life. We're always in the top 10 for, other things, that type of thing. So out of 170 to 190 countries, depending on the group of the week. Country borders change all the time. But the case in point is this. They made it mandatory to have a $15 minimum wage in, I believe it was Nova Scotia. This was last year, the year before. And for the very few people that got hired on the minimum wage, they actually lost jobs. They lost thousands of jobs. Why? Because mom and pop shops cannot afford minimum wage. It's just, it is what it is. It comes down to, now, should there be a standard of living? Yes, I do believe in good labor laws. I do believe in a country with good labor laws, you don't need unions. But I also believe that you got to look at a fair wage system where not everybody can pay $15 an hour. And in the States, for example, where there, all these Walmarts and fast food restaurant workers that have been, striking for minimum wage, $15 an hour, and got it. Well, they didn't really win because they're going to be replaced by a robot economy anyway. You can already see this in the grocery stores and stuff like that. Basically, the automation that's come in is basically, over the past 50 years, is quite impressive. I mean, you look at auto workers, 1950 to now. In 1950, it might took 50 guys to build a car. Now it takes 3. You know what I mean? Why? Because the machine, you just need somebody to turn the machines on and off. There's still a few things done by hand, but most of it is automated. Well, go into a grocery store. You have now these checkout centers that are just, you go, you put your stuff on whatever, you scan whatever, you're your own cashier, and you pay there. So right there, you see 6 of these things in the row. That's 6 robots that are working where people used to work. You see what I mean? And that's going to grow. So right now, this is one of the problem even Adolf Hitler talked about, was over modernizing his economy. Yeah, good, bad, whatever. There was some things that Nazi Germany did right. There were some things they did wrong. One thing was not to over-industrialize to the point where you'd put people out of work. But, like anything, you can't stop an idea whose time has come. Therefore, if a new technology comes along that can eliminate, 50 workers for a business, they're going to do it. They're going to take it. They're going to save that money. But now you've got 50 people out of work. What are you going to do with these people? And this is where the United Nations seems to be kind of heading with their, global sustainable development stuff, is to basically inflate the populations. But I do believe they want some sort of a mass die-off. However it's going to happen, I think the economic collapse will pretty much kill off a lot of people, particularly older people who will no longer be getting their retirement, because no one's going to hire somebody at 82 years old, or even at 64 years old, or 65 years old, or in our case 68 years old, to retire. Here in Canada, the retirement's pushed to 68, and it's to kick in the next 8 years. So right now, if you're 65, you're going to retire, but you might not be retiring for long if the economy crashes. And who's going to hire you? You know what I mean? Who's going to hire you when you're that old? Very, very hard. If you go into fast food restaurants and stuff like that, who's the staff? All the new hirees are people in their 40s, like myself, 30s, 40s, 50s. Some people in their 60s working at these, as cashiers, and these are like student jobs. Why? Because we have a service-based economy. Service-based economy really does put a lot of people out of work. It kills your innovation of your country. The other thing is ending poverty and starvation. Again, you're not teaching the people how to grow their own fish. Like the saying goes, you teach a man to fish, you feed him for a lifetime. You give a man a fish, you feed him for a day, right? I'm supposed to say it the other way around here for the effect, but you get the idea. So that said, it really does sound great what they want to do, end poverty and have good food and everything like that. They'll do it in one area, but they won't do it everywhere. And not only that, it's just, again, when the third world replenishes itself at 80 million a year, and it'll inflate probably to double that or triple that if we keep giving these people free stuff and not kind of forcing them to develop enough so that they stay sustainable. So maybe the third world is sustainable at 30 million a year, globally, or 20 million a year, where nobody's starving to death because people aren't having more kids than they can actually feed. But right now it's like, well, the plane will come in on Wednesday, the sacks of food come off of it, whatever. The local farmer who would have probably sold you vegetables, well, he can't compete with free. So again, it does set people up for disaster in the long run. In fact, trying to fight poverty with welfare seems to actually create way more poverty, because all you're doing is just taking the resources from one group, throwing it partially to another group, not enough to completely help them, but just enough to keep everybody equally poor. So you can have social programming, but not like this, not on a global scale. 9, build resilient infrastructure, promote inclusive and sustainable industrialization and forest innovation. 10, reduce equality within and amongst countries. 11, make cities a human settlement, inclusive, safe, resilient, and sustainable. Again, how do you guarantee that rebels don't come into your city and blow things up and shoot things? Like, you can't even do that now in a first world country. How do you do this in the third world country? You can't. So again, ripping more resources. The entity of the United Nations, again, is such a foreign aid cash sucking machine that really every country, if they can get sovereignty back, they would be best to get out of it. But then those, of course they'll make the plea, oh well, what about the starving Marvins and everything? Well, they're starving anyway. You know what I mean? How about we teach them? I don't mind teaching on smaller scales. Okay, this country wants to learn how to do this country wants to learn how to do that. But when it gets to the point where it's not sustainable to do this global plan, we're talking 7 billion people on the planet here to take care of. Okay, I'd rather teach 7 billion people how to take care of themselves rather than to take care of. And as far as pollution and stuff like that, well, that only comes from the major massive factories and stuff like that. So again, these third world countries, They start up these factories, but these factories always have lower standards than the first world countries, which puts the first world countries out of work. And all they do, like we're doing to the Chinese, to India, to South America and stuff like that. What's one thing we do with globalization? Well, we send our jobs to the cheapest the countries with the cheapest labor to build the cheapest stuff from the lowest bidder, and raise our currencies to the bottom so that we could have cheap exports. But then the inflation comes home to roost, and this you get all these trade deficits and all these things by trying to create this equality. Whereas if we said, okay, the highest standard rules, and the United Nations will never go to the highest standard. They make it sound like they will, but they don't, because the people that run the United Nations are the same people that own these corporations. Your WalMarts and your they're all in the Rothschilds, the Rockefellers, whatever, and a whole bunch of others. They're all invested in the poor countries because it's cheap. Which again doesn't allow these poor countries to actually create enough wealth for themselves to get them out of the hole anyway. And it goes on and on and on. So that said, number 12, ensure sustainable consumption and product patterns. That one scares me because right now they're talking about extra taxes on meat and stuff like that, which there's already tons of taxes on meat, stuff like that, and more taxes, more tax. Basically, they're going to regulate what you can eat. If you want to eat freaking 3 pounds of sugar dipped in lard, that's up to you. They want to make it so that they control exactly what kind of food you can and cannot eat. Yeah, that I think is, I think that's dangerous. Once the government controls food, which they kind of control now everywhere, anyway, and food reserves right now are dangerously low in all countries. One good natural disaster, a ton of people are going to die. A ton of people are going to die. And as usually is the case. But the thing is that we're looking at, I gotta see what time is at here. Wow, the time flies on these. You're looking at, again, control the food, like Henry Kissinger said, you control the food, you control the people, food is a weapon, and I agree with that. If you want a stable nation, you feed the people. Fat, well-fed people are pretty docile. Hungry, starving people are desperate. Simple as that. That said, teach a man to fish, give a man a fish, you feed him for a day. Teach a man to fish, you feed him for a lifetime. Goal 13, take urgent action to combat climate change and its impacts, which is, don't even get me started on that one. 14, conserve and sustainable use of oceans, seas, marine resources for sustainable development. Again, I'm not against the ideas of what they're proposing. Again, I do like the idea of the oceans being very well protected. I don't like the idea of exporting oil via tanker everywhere around the world, especially in countries that can produce their own oil. There is, I'm also for, like, for example, here in Canada, use the oil for domestic use only, maybe send some to the States because they're border. But the idea of, Saudi Arabia shipping oil all around the world, okay, to countries that don't have oil, it makes sense. But should we be buying oil from Saudi Arabia over Canada? You know what I mean? Like, really? No. That type of thing. But that said, from a sustainable point of view, for countries that can't use or that can't produce oil, and there are some, most countries actually can't produce oil, that'd be, smarter for those countries to find better ways to make biofuels. So then, and move to, biodiesel, stuff like that. Not easily done, but it can be done. It can be done. That said, in Europe, really, there's no reason to send oil in a tanker anywhere. You could pretty much have the oil shipped via truck or pipeline or whatever, and most of it already is anyway. So that type of thing, so getting tankers off the, working to get tankers off the ocean would be a good idea, that type of thing. So that we have less natural or less disasters like that. So, okay, yeah, you can do these things, but the problem is usually they don't do it from a point of view to clean the planet up. They do it from a point of view to control the resource. That's why the Anglo-American Empire is so heavily invested in trying to control the world's resources, so that they have a say, nobody else has a say. Golden rule: ye who has the world rules, right? Goal 15: restore and promote sustainable use of terrestrial ecosystems, sustainable manage forest, combat desertification, and halt the reverse land denigration and halt biodiversity loss. Okay, I'm not saying none of these things happen. Some of these things just happen naturally. That's there. Desertification happens, yes, but so does global greening, that type of thing. So the problem is they point out one area, for example, oh, this area is just drying out and the desert's getting bigger there, but then they don't tell you about the part of the desert that's the deserts that are turning green, that type of thing. Vietnam getting snow for the first time in like something like 50 years. I think it was Vietnam or whatever this year. All these like really cold patterns moving in everywhere and stuff like that. They don't add those things up so that they, because they want to make it look like there's global warming. But when you look at the overall temperatures everywhere and if you factor in everything, it's not what they factor in, it's what they leave out, lie by omission, right? 16, promote peaceful, inclusive societies for sustainable development, provide access to justice for all, and build effective, accountable, inclusive institutions at all levels. Again, not everybody around the world wants to follow the same type of laws. The people will kind of reject laws that they go against. Islamic law doesn't conform to Magna Carta, that type of thing. You're just not going to get that. And that will actually, you will create more destabilization by trying to force that. If the people come to it naturally within their own country, put out a stepping stone for them, sure, why not? But if they don't, forcing it on them just creates more destabilization. Whether you agree with them or not is not the issue. That's what the majority of the people want there. That's what they're going to be subjected to. Protect your area, let them protect their area. Goal 17, strengthen the means of implementation and revitalize the global partnership for sustainable development. Okay, acknowledging that the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change is primarily institutional, intergovernmental form and negotiated by the Global Response Climate Change. One goal: end poverty in all forms everywhere. Number one. By 2030, eradicate extreme poverty in all people everywhere, currently measured living as less on $1.25 a day. Okay, one thing I'm going to talk about these people that live on $1.25 a day. They don't pay $600 a month rent. They might pay, $10 a month rent or $5 a month rent, or no rent at all. They might be living off the land. So poverty is a really strange thing to put a dollar and cents on. I look more, are they eating or not? You can find people that live in tribal regions that are fat. Like I mean fat, like obese fat. Not too often, because most of these people are actually usually pretty healthy, running around in the bush all the time, but they're healthy. But some of them are fat. They overeat. Why? Because they got lots of resources there. I don't know if you can ever get fat eating coconuts, but some people do. That type of thing. So with that said, I guess I'm going to have to wrap it up. I guess there's going to be a part 4. This is long, it's dry, I know, but it does kind of give you a real good idea of what they are actually after and how they're trying to, what their blueprint is anyway. Now, how they want to implement the blueprint, that's where it gets a little bit tricky. And it's also one of those things where you can't really say for sure that they can pull it off because without massive, they have to restrict somebody else to give something to somebody else. This is just a larger version of communism. Pretty much the 10 pillars of communism with a green wrapper. So it's the watermelon, green communism. Green on the outside, red on the inside. In other words, we'll decide for you because you're too stupid to decide for yourself. And there are some people out there that believe that the United Nations is the greatest thing since sliced bread because all the great things they do. But when you really look at the United Nations for what it is, it's a corrupt organization. It steals money. It puts people on the UN Council that are you got Saudi Arabia is on the the UN Council for Human Rights. What does that tell you? You know what I mean? So, that type of thing. If you look at the Saudi government, they're definitely not very good to their people. That type of thing. We shouldn't be doing anything with these people until their government, they get a better government. That type of thing. So we don't do that. We don't play that kind of game. What we do is we go with the United Nations. Even here in Canada, quite a few years back, they said they couldn't audit the United Nations because it was too big. So what that tells me is anything that you can't find where the funding's going, you cut that funding. And when the squeaky wheels start yelling, hey, where did my funding go? You'll know where the funding went. That said, the idea of blindly giving cash to, again, unelected bureaucrats over there somewhere who are going to decide what our laws are goes completely against sovereignty. because they're not at the best interest of the people. Even if they say these are not the planet's keepers, these people, they may think they know what's best for everybody, but they usually end up creating way more poverty, way more starvation, way more inflation of people. Again, people in the third world that have an airplane coming in, a food airplane, UN airplane coming in on Wednesday, sure, they're happy for that, but that airplane's been coming in every Wednesday for the past 30 years. Okay, these people are not developing. They're basically now a slave, not a slave, I guess you'd say, but they're basically enabled by enabled to not move forward by knowing that they're secure that the plane comes in. But if that airplane breaks down, people are starving for the next 2 weeks. You know what I mean? That's how the United Nations is. Rather than bringing people in with, and there are areas where they do this, but again, it's on small scale. You can only do this stuff on small scale. You can't save 80 million people a year and end poverty. It's never going to happen, because if it was that easy to do, mankind would have done it by now. Mankind would have done it by now. There's, environmental capacity is only so much, and you have to teach people. Again, I'd rather teach 7 billion people how to take care of themselves by themselves rather than trying to take care of them and prop them up for failure. And that's what the UN does. Anyway, I'll leave it at that. So if you like this kind of content, please consider making a donation to the channel. Links down below. Thank you so much to everybody who has. If you want to make a couple of bucks for yourself, I don't know what's going on with the TSU link, but check it out. Check it out anyway. Maybe it'll be up. If TSU is up, you might be able to make money there. If not, oh well. I'll put the TSU for the next couple of weeks, and then if it's not up, then I'll probably get rid of the TSU link. Next to that, rate, subscribe, share, comment, like. I don't know when I'm going to come out with part 4. I'm just starting to get time to do this stuff again now, because I've been going back and forth to town so much. I don't know when part 4 is going to come out, but this is a long-term thing, so to see what they're up to. It is a lot of reading. If you want to go to the United Nations page to see what they're up to, you can read it there. This I took pretty much right from the UN page. So anyway, rate, subscribe, share, comment, like. Be true to yourselves, be true to others. Always do the right thing, and have yourselves a great day. G'day, hi, and welcome. Alright, this is the third installment, and hopefully the last of Agenda 2030. Now, just to, last time I tried to make one of these videos, I didn't hit the record button, so there is some stuff that I missed, but it's so long that basically, you'll get the gist if you've watched all 3 parts anyway. But anyway, here we go. This one is it's pretty dry material, but I'm, pretty much getting through it. Just so when you see these policies and stuff coming up in your towns and cities and whatever, and particularly like here in Canada, almost every law coming in now is coming in from backdoor from the United Nations. You'll hear things like sustainable development and stuff like that, and these buzzwords and stuff like that, and you'll always have a reference to the United Nations at some point. Anyway, just jumping in, this is kind of just randomly where I left off at the last one. Although I did miss a little bit, but anyway, there's a lot of repetitive stuff in here. Anyway, sorry. 40. The means of implementing targets of under Goal 17 and under the SDG are key to realizing our agenda and equal importance of our goals and targets. The agenda includes SDGs can be met with a framework and relevant to global partnership for sustainable development and supported by the concrete policies and endorsements by the General Assembly and the Addis Ababa Action Agenda, which is the integral part of Agenda 2030 and the Sustainable Development. We recognize that the full implement of full implement of the Addis Ababa ABA Action Agenda is critical to the realization of the Sustainable Development Goals and targets. Okay, now keep going. 41. We recognize each country has a primary responsibility for its own economical and social development, and the new agenda deals with the means of requiring implemented goals and targets. We recognize these will include the mobilization of financial resources as well as capacity building for the transfer of environmentally sound technologies for the developing countries on favorable terms, including the conclusion of preferential terms as mutually agreed, public financing, both domestic and internationally, so meaning global taxes. That's what the global carbon tax is about, is to fund stuff like this. We will pay for vital role in providing essential services and publics and goods to the catalyzing other sources of financing. We acknowledge the role of diverse private sector, ranging from micro enterprises to cooperative multinationals and civil society organizations and philanthropic organizers, i.e. guys like George Soros, and implements of the new agenda. So in other words, they get to decide where everybody's money is going to go. So 42, we support the implementation of relevant strategies and programs of action, including the Istanbul Declaration of Program of Action, the SIDS Accelerated Modalities of Action, the SAMOA Pathway, the Vienna Program of Action, the landlocked development countries for the decade 2014 to 2024, and the reaffirm of the importance of the support of African Union Agenda 2063 and the program of the Partnership for Africa and develop the NEPAD, all of which are integral to the new agenda. We recognize the major challenges and achievements of durable peace and sustainable development in countries in conflict and post-conflict situations. So, in other words, these are really long-term. So the plan is always going to be molding to something new, but the agenda really is the same. It is basically one world government, one world everything: military, police, schooling, financial system. You get it. The problem is that not everybody around the world is on board with this. This is why, the Anglo-American Empire fights with the Eurasian Pacific Empire, which is Russia, China, and Iran, India, the BRICS nations, etc., etc. And of course, the Anglo-American Empire is, Canada, the United States, Europe, the Anglo-American petrodollar, so to speak. That's what a lot of the wars are about now. So by 2063, when they'll probably have a few new agendas in between that. Agenda 21 was supposed to be the be-all, end-all, but it doesn't really work. And the bigger these agendas get, the more impossible they become. However, the more impossible they become, the more destabilizing they seem to be around the world. So wrapped in a utopian blanket, it really, really doesn't do what it sets out to do. They say eradicate poverty and create this massive equality, but the idea that everybody's going to have the same, earn the same, it's very communistic when you think about it. They expect everybody's interchangeable, and basically not only interchangeable, but that everybody's some sort of a like a robot, that they're going to be able to follow this agenda with whatever, right? But anyway, 43, we emphasize that international public finance plays an important role of complementing the efforts of the countries to mobilize the public resources domestically, especially in the poorest and the most vulnerable countries in the limited domestic resources, An important use of international public finance includes ODA is to catalyze additional resources and mobilization from other sources, public and private. The ODA reaffirm the respective commitments, including the commitment by the developed countries to achieve the target of 0.7% of ODA and GNI to developing countries, and 15% to 0.2% ODA and GNI to the least developed countries. So in other words, they want to build manufacturing and stuff in third world countries to give jobs there, but they will take it from us to give it to them. Communism has always been the same. Everybody's equal as long as I can have more, So this is for the little people, it's not for the big people up at the top, right? So 44, we acknowledge the importance of the international financial institutions, basically Rothschild banking, in line with their mandates. The policies and space of each country, in particularly developed countries. We recommend it to broadening the strength and voicing of participants in developed countries, including African countries, least developed countries, landlocked developed countries, small island developed states, and middle-income countries. The international economic decision made norm setting and global economic governance. So global governance tells you one world government, right? So